Hello? I'm Lark? It started with my mom grabbing my hand, her voice trembling. I'm afraid of your sister-in-law. That whisper should have been a warning. Instead, it became a thread I kept pulling until everything unraveled. The forged documents, the hidden pills, the bank loans signed behind my back. They erased me from my own family, one polite signature at a time. But why did they need me gone so badly? And what exactly was in her hand that day? So ordinary, so dangerous, so final. Would you have seen it coming? Because I didn't. And now, I want to tell you everything. By the time I turned into my mother's driveway, the sky had dropped into that November gray where you can't quite tell if it's about to snow or just hang low all day out of spite. The house hadn't changed much on the outside. Same faded blue shutters, same crack in the front step I'd tripped on as a teenager. But the moment I cut the engine and sat still, something felt off. It wasn't just the cold. It was the kind of quiet that settles over a place that used to be loud, where the walls remember laughter, arguments, footsteps, and now they just echo. I got out slowly, grabbing my small weekend bag and pausing on the porch before knocking, even though I had a key. Old habits. The door opened before I could knock. "Oh, you're early," Callista chirped, pulling the door wide with a smile too practiced to be sincere. "Traffic was light," I said, stepping inside. The warmth from the heater blasted me, but it didn't touch the chill in my chest. The living room was neat, too neat, as if it had been prepped for company, not lived in. Callista wore her usual, neutral-toned cardigan, pearl studs, hair perfect, not a strand out of place. She didn't hug me, just stood with that smug calm she always wore like perfume. "Mom's in the kitchen," she added, as if she needed to justify herself. I didn't respond. Just nodded and walked past her, the soles of my boots barely making a sound on the polished floor. When I entered the kitchen, Marlena was standing at the stove, stirring something in a saucepan. The smell hit me, a mix of onions and celery and something heartier, maybe stuffing. But it wasn't the scent that stopped me. It was her. My mother looked smaller. Her sweater hung loose on her shoulders, and her hair, which used to be kept short and neat, had grown out just enough to look unkempt. She didn't hear me come in, or maybe she did and pretended otherwise. "Mom," I said gently. She turned. Her eyes lit up for a flicker, just a flicker, before something shuddered down behind them. Her smile was thin, forced. "Lark," she said, "you're early." That's what Callista said. I stepped closer, setting my bag down by the pantry door. "Need help?" She didn't answer, just stared at the stove for a beat too long. Then suddenly, she turned to me, reached out, and gripped my hand, tight. Her fingers were colder than I expected, not frail exactly, but trembling, like she'd been holding something in too long. "I'm afraid of your sister-in-law," she whispered. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Her voice was low, barely audible, and it cracked at the end like she was afraid someone might hear. "What?" I asked, leaning closer, thinking maybe she was confused, but her eyes weren't confused. They were focused, sharp, scared. "I'm afraid of Callista," she said again, this time with a little more breath behind it. I didn't speak right away. My mother had never said anything like that about anyone in her life, especially not Callista. For years, she'd defended her, praised her, let her handle the finances, the medications, the appointments, everything. "What happened?" I asked carefully. She looked away. "Nothing." "I just forget I said anything." Her grip loosened, and she turned back to the stove. "Forget I said anything." The phrase echoed like a slammed door. Before I could press, Callista's voice floated in from the hallway. "Dinner's almost ready. Lark, do you mind setting the table?" I didn't answer. I just moved toward the dining room, mind spinning. As I reached the sideboard for the napkins, I passed through the hallway where Ellis stood, flipping through a stack of mail. He barely acknowledged me. "Hey," he muttered, sorting envelopes. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound normal. He handed one to Callista without looking. "This one's for you." She took it, flipped it open. The moment I caught the corner of the envelope, my heart stopped. "Durable power of attorney," it read, in bold print. She smiled, holding it in a way that was too casual to be accidental. I blinked, swallowed. She tucked it under her arm and turned to me. Lark, can you grab the silverware? I nodded slowly, but in my chest something was starting to rise. Not panic, not yet. Something slower, older. That night, after dinner, while everyone was lounging in the living room watching a Hallmark movie, I helped Mom wash dishes. She didn't say much. Neither did I. When I reached for the dish towel, I noticed her hands again, how tight they were gripped around the edge of the counter, how her eyes flicked toward the doorway as if expecting someone to appear behind her. Have you been sleeping okay? I asked softly. She shrugged. Some nights. Do you want me to look over your meds tomorrow? That got her attention. She looked at me for a second too long. No, she said. Callista's got it. Of course she does. After the dishes were done, I walked up to my old room. It hadn't changed much, still had the same lilac curtains I hated, still smelled faintly of furniture polish and something floral, maybe potpourri, maybe age. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about her hand in mine. The fear in her voice, the document in Callista's hands. Something was wrong. And for once, I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine just to keep the peace. So I stood there, her hand still loosely wrapped around mine, my eyes locked on the words printed across that thick envelope. Durable power of attorney. Callista held it like it was nothing, just another piece of mail between grocery ads and Thanksgiving coupons. But to me, it wasn't paper. It was a shift in power, a warning dressed as convenience. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I went upstairs, laid in my old bed, and listened to the unfamiliar silence of a house that used to hum. There was something artificial about the quiet here now. It wasn't peace. It was control. The next morning, I woke early. The sky was pale, coated in a layer of frost that made the lawn shimmer like it had secrets to keep. I pulled on a sweater and made my way downstairs. The kitchen light was already on. Marlena was seated at the small breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. She was already dressed, a navy blue cardigan buttoned all the way to her neck, a pair of pearl earrings that didn't quite match. She looked like someone trying too hard to seem okay. Morning, I said. She nodded. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, I admitted. I moved around the kitchen quietly, making a second pot of coffee even though hers was still warm. I wasn't ready to ask questions, not yet. But the air between us was heavy, like both of us knew something was wrong, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud just yet. Callista's making brunch, Marlena said softly, as if announcing the weather. Of course she is. She looked down at her mug, the corners of her lips twitching. I couldn't tell if it was a smile or a flinch. By mid-morning, the house filled with voices. Ellis had returned from the store with bagels and orange juice. Two of my uncles had arrived with their wives, laughing too loud for this early in the day. Callista floated through it all, pouring mimosas like a hostess from a lifestyle show. Calm, composed, effortless. She placed a glass in front of me. Orange juice, splash of something festive, she said with that polished smile. I gave a polite nod. She turned to the rest of the group. I just want to say, she began, holding her glass high, we're so grateful this year. Not just for family and health, but for clarity and peace of mind. The room hushed a little. After a lot of careful conversations and tough decisions, Marlena made it official. Ellis and I will be handling her affairs moving forward. Power of attorney, finances, all the hard stuff she shouldn't have to worry about anymore. I froze. Marlena sat across from me, her face passive. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just gently folded her napkin and placed it in her lap. A few people clapped. Callista smiled brighter, like she was soaking in applause she'd been rehearsing for. Ellis looked down at his glass, probably grateful he didn't have to speak. I sat there, watching the woman who had taken over this house claim victory like it was brunch conversation. Afterward, as the crowd filtered out and the kitchen buzzed with half-hearted cleanup, I walked into the dining room. The sun had shifted just enough to cast long beams of light across the polished table. That's when I saw them. Folders, legal pads, pens with blue caps twisted off, all laid out like a board meeting. Ellis was at the head of the table. Callista sat next to him. Two of our uncles leaned in, glancing over documents I hadn't been shown. When I stepped forward, Ellis looked up and said, "Hey, can you give us a minute?" Callista didn't even glance my way. "It's just boring estate stuff. You really don't have to worry about it." I paused. My hands went cold. I looked down at the nearest paper and saw my name, scratched out in ballpoint pen, not omitted, removed. "Sure," I said. My voice was steady, controlled. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, where the sink was full of half-rinsed plates and someone had spilled cranberry sauce on the floor, and walked through it. No one noticed. I stayed there just outside the dining room, close enough to hear them mention trust distribution and secondary property, but far enough that I couldn't be accused of eavesdropping. Later, I went out for a walk. It wasn't warm, but I needed air. I walked past my old elementary school, past the park where I used to swing while Marlena read her library books on a bench. My feet moved on muscle memory, but my mind kept looping the scene at the table. I remembered being 15, trying to ask about Dad's will, and Ellis had told me, "Don't worry about it, you're the baby." I remembered being 22, home from nursing school, and asking why Callista was signing Mom's insurance paperwork. "You're not here enough," they'd said. And now, I was standing in the very house I grew up in, and I wasn't even invited to the table where decisions were being made. It wasn't just that I'd been excluded, it was how effortlessly they did it, like I had never mattered at all. So I sat there, staring into my untouched coffee, the low murmur of their voices drifting out of the dining room like white noise. It was almost evening now. The light had changed, slipping into that dim, yellow-gray tone that made everything inside the house feel older, quieter. Like the truth had its own filter. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. We all gathered in the dining room again, Ellis at one end of the table, Callista flitting around with napkins and reheated green bean casserole like we were in some family sitcom and not whatever this was turning into. My mother sat next to me, silent, cutting her turkey into impossibly small pieces without ever lifting her fork. The conversation was light on the surface. Talk about holiday traffic, someone's new car, a joke about gas prices. Everyone seemed determined to pretend things were perfectly ordinary. Except they weren't. I noticed how Marlena's hands trembled when she reached for her water glass. It wasn't the tremble of cold or age. It was tension, anticipation, fear. "Here, Mom," Callista said sweetly, standing and placing 2 pills beside her plate. "Take these before dessert. Doctor's orders." Marlena hesitated. She looked at me for a split second, barely, but it was there. That moment where her eyes begged me to do something. Still, she picked them up with shaking fingers and swallowed them with the kind of resignation that made my chest tighten. After dinner, I offered to help clean up, but Callista waved me off. "Go relax. You're the guest." Guest. The word stung more than it should have. I wandered into the den and sat down with the TV remote, trying to distract myself. After a few minutes of flipping through channels, I grabbed Marlena's tablet from the side table, hoping to find the streaming app she usually used. When I turned it on, a new email notification flashed across the top of the screen. My hand froze above the touchscreen. The subject line read, "Placement secured, Marlena." Beneath it, a preview of the message, "I'll have the room ready by the 3rd. She still thinks it's a wellness retreat. Don't tell Lark anything yet." The sender? Callista Wren. My fingers curled tightly around the edge of the tablet as I opened the message fully. I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't misreading, but there it was, clear, calculated, and written like she was talking about moving a piece of furniture. She still thinks it's a wellness retreat. She. Not Marlena, not your mom, just she. Like my mother was some project to be transferred, not a human being. And me? I was a complication to be managed, a threat best kept in the dark. I stared at the email, my breath catching somewhere between my chest and throat. Not panic, yet, but something heavier. A cold realization spreading through me, freezing each corner of my trust. She was planning to move my mother, behind her back, behind mine, without a conversation, without consent. I clicked forward and sent the message to my personal email. Then I took a screenshot. Then another. Just in case, I didn't trust anything to live in only one place anymore. I put the tablet down slowly, like it might explode if I moved too fast. The house was still humming faintly, Callista laughing in the kitchen, Ellis asking where the whipped cream was. From where I sat, I could see the edge of the family photo on the hallway wall. Thanksgiving last year. Marlena looked 10 years younger in it. I looked like someone who believed everything was fine. I went upstairs. I didn't say goodnight. I didn't hug anyone. Inside my room, I paced for a while, unsure if I was walking off the anger or letting it circle me like a predator. I finally sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the pale purple wallpaper I'd hated since I was 13. The same faded flower pattern still clung to the walls, like it refused to acknowledge time had passed. My thoughts spiraled. Why would she do this? Why would Marlena let her? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Because I had let them write me out of the story years ago. Every time I stayed quiet during those family decisions, every time I let them talk over me, say I was too sensitive, too emotional, too far away to know what's really going on. Every time I excused Callista's bossiness as efficiency, every time I didn't challenge Ellis when he brushed me off with, "Don't worry, we've got it under control." I had been complicit in my own erasure. And now they were trying to finish the job, starting with shipping my mother off like she was a problem to be solved. I laid back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The crack above the window was still there, jagged and spidering. I used to trace it with my eyes as a teenager, telling myself it looked like the map of a place I'd escaped to one day. But I had escaped, and now I was back. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept going over every interaction since I'd arrived. Marlena's distant eyes, her hesitation, that whisper in the kitchen, the way Callista moved through the house like she owned it, the way Ellis avoided eye contact, the envelope, the email, the pills. I replayed it all like puzzle pieces finally finding their corners. Somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., I let my eyes close. But instead of rest, I drifted into memory. Dad's funeral. I was 19. There'd been tension even then. Papers passed around. Words like executor, estate, beneficiary. I had asked one question, just one, about what was happening to Dad's insurance policy. Ellis had patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, Callista's handling it." As if that was supposed to soothe me, as if handling it was a replacement for transparency. Even then, they'd trained me to be small, to accept silence over conflict, to believe that keeping peace was more important than asking questions. But I wasn't 19 anymore, and this wasn't about money. This was about my mother, my family, my right to be in the room. I got out of bed, pulled on a jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The air bit at my skin, sharp and dry. I looked up at the sky, cloudless now, but heavy with whatever storm was coming. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the streetlights, the occasional bark of a distant dog, the faint rustle of trees stripped bare by winter. Then I whispered to myself, almost without thinking, "You don't get to erase me." That was the moment it shifted. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the one paying attention. And that email? That was my first piece of leverage. I woke up with my jaw clenched and the weight of truth sitting on my chest. That email was still burned into my brain, every word replaying on a loop, whispering warnings I could no longer ignore. There was no more pretending, no more soft smiling through discomfort. The fog had lifted, and now I had to start tracking what they were really doing to my mother. Downstairs, the house was already alive. Callista moved through the kitchen like a woman hosting a cooking segment, apron on, cheerful hum, spatula in hand. Marlena sat at the breakfast nook, staring blankly at her tea like it was speaking a language she couldn't understand. She wasn't wearing the cardigan I'd laid out for her last night. Her hair was brushed but stiff, like someone had styled it for her, not by her. "Morning," Callista chirped. "Hope you slept better. You looked exhausted last night." I gave her a smile I didn't mean. "Busy mind, I guess." She slid a plate of scrambled eggs toward me. "Fuel up. Big day. I have to take some calls about the estate planning updates. Ellis'll be working from the den." "Big day. Right." I sat across from Marlena. Her spoon shook faintly as she stirred honey into her tea. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite string the words together. "You okay, Mom?" I asked quietly. Callista swooped in before she could answer. "She's been having a little morning fog. Nothing unusual. She'll feel better after breakfast and meds." "Meds?" I asked. "Just her usual. I added a supplement for cognition support. Doctor approved." She turned back to the stove before I could say anything. But the tension between us stretched thin, just waiting for one of us to tug. I made a mental note. Pills first. After breakfast, while Callista loaded the dishwasher and Marlena drifted to the living room to nap, I excused myself and headed to the bathroom. I shut the door behind me, not because I needed privacy, but because I needed time. I opened the mirrored cabinet slowly. Top shelf. Antacids, aspirin, a few dusty bottles of vitamin D. Middle shelf. Prescription bottles, neatly lined up. I scanned the labels. One bottle stood out immediately. Seroquel. I froze. That's not something a woman like Marlena should be on. Certainly not at that dosage. I'd seen it in my work before. Heavy antipsychotic, often used off-label to sedate elderly patients in long-term care. It was an ugly, quiet tactic in underfunded facilities, the kind of thing families sued over. I picked it up and squinted at the prescription label. Prescribed by a Dr. Karen Ellis. I didn't recognize the name. Filled last week. 60 pills. 5 taken. I took a picture with my phone, then another of the pharmacy label. I gently set the bottle back, aligning it perfectly in the row, just as I'd found it. Back in the hallway, the silence of the house pressed in like a vacuum. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock in the foyer, the clink of a spoon in a coffee mug. And underneath it all, the hollow hum of manipulation. By midday, Ellis had set up his laptop at the dining room table. Callista was in the kitchen, on speakerphone with someone she kept calling counselor. I moved between them carefully, blending into the background, like wallpaper. Ellis left his laptop open when he stepped out to take a call. I hesitated for a breath, glanced toward the kitchen, then slid into the chair. The screen was still active. A browser window open, loan application, commercial real estate refinance. I scrolled. Borrower, Ellis Wren. Guarantor, Marlena Coyle, power of attorney attached. Collateral, 1384 Summit Lane, primary residence. My breath caught. He was leveraging our mother's home. I clicked through to the attached documents. The digital signature line was filled. Callista's name, not Ellis's. And under that, a checkbox marked Durable POA, verified. I took screenshots, multiple, sent them to myself, emailed them to a secure folder I kept for patient confidentiality reports. Whatever I could do to create backups, insurance. I logged out and closed the lid gently just as Ellis returned from the hallway. He glanced at me. "Need something?" "No," I said smoothly. "Just looking for my charger." He nodded, unaware. That evening, after Callista went upstairs to shower, I cornered Ellis in the mudroom. "You used the house," I said flatly. He turned. "Excuse me?" "You filed a loan. You signed her house over as collateral. She didn't consent. You know she didn't." His shoulders slumped just slightly, but he recovered fast. "It's temporary. It'll help cover the renovation for the back property. Increase its value. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I nearly laughed. "You risked everything she has without even telling her. Without telling me. She's not thinking clearly anymore. Someone has to make decisions." "No," I said, my voice sharp but low. "Someone has to be held accountable." His face tightened. "You always do this, you know. Come in with your hero complex like you're the only one who cares." "No," I said again. "I come in because no one else seems to notice the line until they're 5 steps past it." He looked away, jaw clenched. I left him there. Upstairs, Marlena was already asleep, or pretending to be. Her bedroom smelled faintly of lavender lotion and something else, metallic and unfamiliar. I sat beside her for a few minutes, just watching her breathe. Her hands twitched now and then. I didn't know if it was from dreams or side effects, maybe both. "I'm going to fix this," I whispered. I went to my room and pulled out my notebook. I wrote down every detail I had so far: dates, names, dosages, file names, the day she started stumbling more than usual. Tomorrow, I would dig deeper. But tonight, I wrote it all down, because no one was going to be able to say I imagined it. Not this time. The email was sent. Copies were stored in multiple folders, backed up to a hard drive I didn't even trust until that night. I closed the lid of my laptop gently, almost ceremonially, and sat there in the dim light of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by things that used to mean something. The wallpaper still peeled in the same spot near the closet. A photo of me at 16 was tucked behind the mirror, me in a marching band uniform, smiling like I belonged somewhere. I didn't belong here now, but I wasn't leaving. Not yet. The morning crept in slowly, dragging a blanket of white across the lawn. Light snow fell without much sound. It suited the house, muted outside, screaming beneath the surface. After a light breakfast that none of us pretended to enjoy, I told Callista I wanted to clean out some boxes in the attic. She looked at me like I'd suggested gutting the kitchen. Why? There's nothing up there but old junk. I'd like to go through it. Some of it's mine. She hesitated for half a breath, then smiled. Of course. Have fun. I climbed the narrow stairs, tugged the pull-string light, and stepped into a world that smelled like dust and old wood. The insulation was poor, and the cold made my fingertips numb. But the quiet up there was clean, honest, the kind you could sit in without being manipulated. The boxes were just as I remembered, some labeled in Marlena's shaky handwriting, others taped shut with old masking tape now curling at the edges. I started with a bin labeled House Docs. There were old utility bills, warranties, even a crayon drawing of our house from when Ellis and I were kids. I moved slowly, not just to preserve the papers, but because some part of me was afraid of what I might find. Then, under a brittle manila folder marked Property Legal, I spotted a small black USB drive. It was taped to a sticky note that had yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakably Marlena's. If I forget, this will remember. My heart thudded. I took the drive downstairs, stopping in the hallway to make sure Callista was still on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice floated down the hall, all charm and, absolutely, I'll follow up on that. Back in my room, I plugged the drive into my laptop. One file, voiceconsent.wav. I hit play. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the sound of a chair creaking, followed by Callista's voice, low, sweet, sickening. Just sign, Marlena. You said you trust me. Don't you want things to be easy? Pause. If Lark shows up again, it'll just confuse everyone. You don't need that stress. Then the scratch of a pen. A sigh. Silence. I pressed stop, but it wasn't enough. I replayed the whole thing, just to be sure. It was real. And it was damning. I sat still for a long time after that, the laptop screen glowing in front of me, the audio file paused mid-second. Marlena hadn't just been manipulated, she'd been recorded, set up. It was deliberate, methodical, and cruel. There was no mistaking what Callista was doing. This wasn't about convenience or care, it was control. Disguised as concern. The quiet that used to shield me, it wasn't enough anymore. I copied the file to 3 different places, an external drive, my work laptop, and a cloud account with a password long enough to give even Ellis a headache. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the hallway with a stack of towels for the linen closet. Callista appeared out of nowhere, like she'd been waiting. Busy today, she said. I nodded. Lots to sort through. She smiled. You always liked keeping your hands full. Helped you avoid the hard conversations. I didn't respond. She stepped closer, folding her arms. Her eyes were sharp now. No performance, just calculation. You always had that poor me look, she said, tone almost casual. Like life handed you less than you deserved. But you weren't the favorite, Lark. You were just what she had left after everyone else stopped showing up. It was a slap without contact. I looked her dead in the eye. And you're afraid of me, I said evenly. That's why you've spent so much energy trying to erase me. Her smile faltered. You keep talking about who Mom trusts, but the one thing she did right was raise me to smell a lie before it walks in the door. Callista opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. I walked past her, quietly, calmly, but my hands shook once I reached the linen closet, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I'd said what I needed to say. No theatrics, just truth. Back in my room, I pulled out a notepad and wrote everything down, what I'd found, what I'd heard, what I'd seen. I mapped it all, the email, the pills, the loan, the audio. I started constructing a timeline, dates, names, paper trail. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was documenting, and that meant something. It meant I wasn't invisible. By nightfall, the snow had thickened, coating the front porch in a soft layer of white. From my window, I saw Marlena asleep in the recliner, a blanket around her shoulders, the flicker of the TV dancing across her face. I couldn't save her from every mistake she'd made. But I could stop the next one. I attached the audio file to an email, addressed it to my attorney. Subject line: urgent. POA abuse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just hit send. I stayed up most of the night, rereading the email chain, re-listening to the audio file, reviewing every note I'd taken, every screenshot I'd saved. By morning, the storm inside me wasn't rage, it was readiness, calm, clear, deliberate, and it was time to push forward. I heard soft footsteps around 7:30 a.m. Marlena moving slowly through the hallway toward the bathroom. I gave her space, let her morning routine pass uninterrupted, then slipped downstairs and waited in the kitchen for Callista and Ellis to finish their usual coffee conversation. They had a rhythm to it, like co-anchors. She spoke, he nodded, he joked, she laughed. Everything rehearsed, right down to the perfect silence when I walked in. They left shortly after 9 a.m. to run a few errands in town, which gave me the opening I needed. Lucy was still in her pajamas when I walked into the family room. She was curled up on the couch, a pink tablet in her lap, headphones loose around her neck. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside her. "You doing anything fun on that thing?" She turned the screen toward me. "Drawing cats," she said proudly. I smiled, then leaned in, my voice quiet. "I have to run you to the library in a bit for your reading event, remember?" She nodded. "Mom packed my books already." 20 minutes later, we were in my car. The roads were slick with sleet, but I drove slow, careful. I could see Lucy watching me through the corner of her eye. I waited, let the silence fill the car. Halfway to the library, she spoke. "Auntie Lark?" "Yeah, baby?" She paused. "Mommy took some papers from Grandma's drawer, but Grandma was sleeping." I didn't blink. "She told me not to tell anyone, said it was a surprise." My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, but I kept my voice soft. "When was this?" "A few days ago, before Thanksgiving. Mommy said Grandma forgets stuff, so she has to help her." "And she told you not to say anything?" Lucy nodded, then looked down at her lap. "Was that bad?" I pulled into the parking lot, shifted the car into park, and turned to face her fully. "Lucy, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. Okay, you were just being honest. That's brave." She smiled faintly. "I don't like secrets." I squeezed her hand gently. "Me neither." After I dropped her off, I sat in the car for 10 full minutes, unmoving. The words, "papers from Grandma's drawer," echoed in my mind, settling beside the email, the pill bottle, the loan documents. When I got back home, Marlena was asleep in her recliner. A soft blanket covered her legs, the television volume turned low. The house was still, the kind of still that told me Callista and Ellis weren't back yet. I stood in the hallway for a while, watching her chest rise and fall. Then I moved to her bedroom. It hadn't changed much in decades. Same crocheted pillowcases, same photo of Dad on the dresser, same bookshelf filled with a mixture of classics and gardening guides. I started at the top shelf, pushing aside dusty Reader's Digest anthologies and paperback mysteries. One book wobbled when I touched it, an outdated almanac with bent pages. Behind it, wedged into the corner, was a small webcam. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to feel victorious or sick. It was plugged into an old laptop I didn't recognize, dust-covered, long forgotten. I carried both to my room and shut the door behind me. The laptop whined when I powered it on, but it booted. Eventually, It took nearly an hour to navigate the ancient operating system, but I found it, buried in a folder labeled Deck 21 Calls. There were 5 video clips. I clicked the first one. Callista's voice filled the speakers. Soft, syrupy. "Don't you want to make things easier for everyone, Marlena?" A faint voice replied, barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Lark hasn't said anything yet." Callista leaned closer, her face just off camera. "She's not coming back this time. Let's not confuse the process. Sign this. No one will bother you again." The clip ended with Marlena hesitantly reaching for the pen. I covered my mouth with both hands. The other clips were variations on the same theme. Callista pushing, Marlena shrinking, not yelling, not threatening, just slow, patient coercion. I exported every file, renamed them by date, backed them up on 3 devices, then printed 2 stills from the clearest clip. One of Marlena holding the pen with shaky hands, another of Callista watching her like a hawk. It was no longer her word against mine. Now, I had footage. By mid-afternoon, I had emailed everything to my attorney and texted a warning to a journalist friend I'd known since college. "You'll want to see this before it hits court." As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the house, I walked into the kitchen and printed the stills. I left them on the table, perfectly spaced, then poured myself a glass of water. Callista walked in a few minutes later, humming. She stopped mid-step when she saw the photos. I didn't speak, just turned slowly to face her. Her lips twitched. "Interesting decor choice." "You're smiling a lot lately," she said after a beat, her tone casual. I nodded. "I've been cleaning." She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Planning something?" I met her gaze evenly. "Didn't you once say you liked surprises?" She stood still for a moment, then picked up one of the photos, turning it toward the light. Her mouth tightened. "You think this proves something?" I stepped forward. "It proves everything." She blinked slowly, calculating. Then she set the photo down, brushed invisible lint off her sleeve, and walked out without a word. Behind her, the air felt different, charged. I knew then what was coming. She wasn't done, but neither was I. They were all looking at me. No one said anything. Not at first. The air in the dining room had shifted. It wasn't just quiet. It was brittle. Like if anyone so much as cleared their throat, the whole thing might shatter. Marlena sat in her wheelchair at the head of the table, her blanket draped across her knees. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked at the edge of her napkin. Callista was frozen in place, her smile stretched too thin. And Ellis, he kept glancing between us, like he was trapped in a courtroom he didn't sign up for, wondering when the judge would call recess. I took my time. I wanted them to feel the silence pressing in. I reached into the manila folder in front of me, pulled out the photos I had printed that morning, and slid them one by one across the table. I didn't look away from Callista. I wanted to watch the moment her grip cracked. The first photo was Marlena slumped slightly on the couch, eyes half open, mouth parted. Harmless, unless you knew how such an image could be twisted. The second was more damning, a still of Callista reaching out with a pen, her face close to Marlena's, captured just before the moment she coaxed her into signing. "Where did you get these?" Callista asked. Her voice had lost its polish. "Where do you think?" I replied calmly. "They were never meant to be found, but Mom has a habit of hiding things she's not ready to let go of." I could see Ellis reading one of the printouts, his brow furrowed as he reached for the next page. It was an email, printed clean and clear. "Will this be enough to establish diminished capacity?" Sent from Callista's email address. Dated 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Marlena's eyes were wet now. She blinked slowly, trying to speak. Her voice came out thin. That wasn't a good day. But I wasn't gone. The room held its breath. I leaned forward slightly. She used that image in a petition to claim Mom was no longer capable of making decisions, and none of you noticed, because you didn't want to. Ellis shifted in his seat. "We didn't know." "No, you didn't ask." My tone never rose, but it was sharp enough to cut. "I thought," he began, but Callista interrupted him, her voice louder now. desperate. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You're acting like I'm some sort of villain. No, I said. I'm acting like the daughter of the woman you manipulated. I pulled out my phone and tapped the speaker icon. Let's hear what Marlena really said about her intentions, long before you ever moved into this house. The call rang twice before a frail voice answered. Eloise Trenton speaking. Hi, Eloise, it's Lark. We're here with the family. Can you repeat what you told me yesterday? A pause. Then, Marlena always said her youngest, Lark, would get the house. She felt Lark was the one who never took, only gave. She was proud of her. Said she never had to ask Lark to show up, because she just did. The line went quiet for a moment. I ended the call. Marlena turned her head slightly toward me, her expression softening. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. Across the table, Callista's hands were clenched in her lap. Her jaw tightened. Are we really doing this here? She muttered. With guests? With family? Exactly, I replied. Because it's family that you used to shield what you were doing. Family you silenced when it didn't serve your plan, she scoffed. You don't know what it's like to manage a life like this, the bills, the medication, the appointments, while you get to play savior when it's convenient. You mean the control, I said. You don't want help, you want ownership. Ellis stood suddenly. The movement startled everyone, even Callista. He looked at the photos again, then at Marlena, then at me. What did we do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked him straight in the eye. You let her. That's what you did. Silence again. Callista looked around the room and saw no allies left, not even an Ellis. Her posture changed, shoulders back, chin up. But there was a tremble in her fingers as she reached for her glass of water. I've done nothing illegal, she said, quieter now. Not yet, I said, reaching for my own folder. But that depends on whether this ends here or in court. Her eyes flashed. You wouldn't. I held her gaze. Try me. Marlena's voice interrupted us both, barely audible. I didn't know how to say no. It was the most honest thing she'd said all week. I turned to her gently. You don't have to. Not anymore. Callista rose slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. I think we're done here, she said, not bothering to meet anyone's eyes. She left the room, footsteps echoing down the hall. A door slammed a moment later. Ellis sat down again, deflated. I didn't know, he repeated, like saying it enough times might make it true, but it didn't matter anymore. For the first time, the house felt like it had shifted, like it had taken a deep breath and was finally letting it out. There was a heaviness in the air as I stood up. Everyone at the table was still watching me, eyes wide, mouths closed, breath held just enough to let me know they finally understood I wasn't bluffing. I walked slowly to the sideboard, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. I didn't rush. I wanted them to see my hands steady. No tremble, no nerves, just certainty. I placed the envelope on the table, centered it in front of me, and untucked the flap. Inside were copies, files, still frames, documents. I laid them out one by one, like cards in a game they didn't know they were playing. The audio you heard was real, I said quietly. And here's the rest of it. First, I showed the USB drive, label facing up. This, I explained, contains every recorded interaction between Callista and Marlena involving legal pressure and coercion, all time-stamped, all stored on a system she never thought anyone would check. Then I pulled out a page showing screenshots from the security camera. Footage, I continued, of Callista entering my mother's room multiple times, pushing documents toward her while she was either sedated or emotionally distressed. The images were clear. Callista's face close to Marlena's, the pen already in her hand, her mouth mid-sentence. It was the kind of thing that didn't require commentary. Next, I laid out the printouts from Ellis's financial activity. Here are bank transactions, loan applications, each tied to power of attorney paperwork that Callista submitted. She used Mom's name to secure assets she had no right to touch. Ellis looked like the blood had drained from his face. Lark, he started, but I cut him off with a raised hand. Let me finish. I pulled out one final sheet. This is a notarized medical timeline from Mom's primary care doctor. It states, unequivocally, that during the week Callista had her sign these documents, she was considered medically competent. There was no legal basis for declaring her diminished. Callista's lips were pressed into a thin line. Her arms were folded across her chest, nails digging into her sleeves. She didn't speak. I took a step back, letting the papers speak louder than I ever could. This is no longer about assumptions or family loyalty, I said. This is evidence, and the moment this room ends, it becomes public record. She laughed, but it was sharp, frayed at the edges. This is ridiculous. You don't understand elder care law. You don't know what it takes to manage all this. I kept this family running while you were out there playing Florence Nightingale for strangers. Before I could respond, Marlena looked up. You knew I was tired, she said slowly. That's why you chose those days. The room fell into silence. You said I didn't have to think anymore, she continued. That you'd take care of it all. You said Lark wouldn't understand. That it would be easier if I didn't worry. Callista looked stunned, like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. That's not how it happened, she mumbled, reaching for her glass of water. Ellis stood suddenly, chair scraping against the floor. He didn't say a word, just left the room, the sound of his footsteps growing faint down the hallway. A knock echoed from the front door. I walked out, opened it, and stepped aside to let my attorney in. She was in her mid-40s, smartly dressed in a charcoal wool coat, hair pulled back, eyes clear and calm. She carried a black leather case and a confidence that made everyone sit up a little straighter. Good afternoon, she said. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Lark Fennell. She placed her folder on the table and flipped it open. Ms. Fennell has filed a formal petition to revoke existing power of attorney, recover unlawfully reassigned assets, and request an injunction for elder exploitation. The words landed like ice across the table. My attorney continued. A judge has already reviewed preliminary evidence. Based on what was submitted, a temporary restraining order has been granted, effective immediately. Callista gasped. You can't be serious. This is my home. No, I corrected her. It's Mom's, and starting today, you don't have any say in what happens here. She looked like she might protest, but she didn't. Instead, she stood up slowly, the pearls around her neck catching the light as she brushed her hands over her blouse. I suppose this is the thanks I get, she said bitterly, after everything I did. No, I said, this is the consequence you earned. Callista turned to Marlena. You're letting her do this to me? Marlena didn't look at her. She reached for my hand instead and said softly, I gave too much to the wrong people, and I didn't say yes when I should have, but I'm saying yes now. My chest tightened. I squeezed her hand. Callista left the room in silence. I followed, not to chase her, but to make sure she left. At the doorway, she paused. You've always needed an audience, haven't you, Lark? She said over her shoulder. Fine, let them clap. I didn't respond. Her heels clicked across the porch wood. A car door opened, then closed. The engine started. Then silence. I stayed there for a moment longer, breathing in the cold air that had started to warm slightly now that the frost was finally breaking. When I turned around, the house felt different, still wounded, but no longer sick. Back in the living room, Marlena sat upright. Her voice was steadier. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who didn't notice, she said. But I didn't. Not soon enough. You noticed, I said gently. You just didn't know what to do. Her eyes met mine. But you did. I nodded, still gripping her hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. No more fighting. No more hiding. Just a long, slow exhale after too many years holding my breath. The front door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I stood in that house and didn't feel like a stranger, not like an intruder, not like someone walking on eggshells, holding her breath to keep from stepping on someone's ego. The sun filtered through the frosted windows just enough to catch the dust in the air, the kind of dust that settles after a long fight. It had been a week since Callista left. A full 7 days of silence where there used to be clipped remarks, passive digs, and forced pleasantries. Now the quiet wasn't weaponized. It wasn't used to hide guilt or manipulate shame. It was soft, uneven, real. That morning, I pulled on my old boots, still crusted with salt from the driveway, and stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The snow underfoot crackled, its surface still stiff from the cold. I stood there with both hands wrapped around the mug and looked out across the yard. The bird bath was frozen. Marlena's garden beds were blanketed in white, hiding whatever was left from last season. It looked clean, even if it wasn't perfect. Inside, Marlena sat in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in the plaid blanket she always used this time of year. She didn't speak much lately, but when she did, it mattered. Her eyes followed me when I passed by now, not in fear, not in confusion, but in awareness. After I finished my coffee, I sat at the kitchen table with a short stack of envelopes. Most were from the lawyer, some utility transfer confirmations, a letter from the county clerk about the deed adjustment, a certified receipt from the court with the updated restraining order against Callista. I flipped through them one by one, methodical, ticking them off my list. Halfway through, I found Ellis's email. I'd skimmed it once when it came in 2 nights ago, but hadn't replied. I hadn't even wanted to read it again. But today, I did. Lark, I don't expect a response. I wouldn't blame you if I never heard from you again. I should have stopped her. I should have protected Mom. I let too much happen for too long. You were right, about everything. I don't know how to make it right. Maybe I can't. Ellis. There was no defense in it, no deflection, just a sad, flat realization of what he'd been complicit in. I didn't know if I'd ever respond. Some things didn't need closure, they just needed distance. Later that afternoon, a notary came by. Marlena and I sat side by side at the dining table, the same one where so many lies had once been laid bare. This time, it held a few crisp pages, a pen, and 2 cups of tea. The notary walked her through the process, explained the lines, the dates, the signatures. Marlena listened, focused. She held the pen with both hands to steady it, then signed slowly. Once done, she slid the papers across the table and looked at me. "You were the one who stayed," she said. I nodded, emotion sitting just behind my eyes. But I didn't cry. Not out of strength, out of certainty. Because I didn't need this to prove anything. Not to her, not anymore. I didn't stay because I wanted something, I told her. I stayed because I couldn't watch them take you. She nodded again, her lips trembling a little. After the notary left, I spent the rest of the evening walking the house. I moved from room to room, turning on lights, opening windows just a crack to let the cold air in, cleansing, grounding. Some rooms felt easier than others. My old bedroom had finally become my space again. Marlena's room still carried weight, but it no longer felt suffocating. Even the kitchen, once a battlefield of quiet hostility, felt like it belonged to us again. In one of the drawers near the sink, I found the last bottle. One of Callista's old prescriptions, the sedative she'd been giving Marlena behind everyone's back. It was empty now, tucked behind a box of tea bags like it was waiting for someone to find it. I held it in my hand for a long time, then I tossed it in the trash. The night came quietly. Marlena watched a rerun of a game show she used to love, chuckling to herself when someone missed an obvious answer. I folded laundry in the corner, listening, not interrupting. And then, without looking at me, she laughed. A real laugh. Short, but sharp enough to make me stop mid-fold. It wasn't long, but it was enough. I smiled. Later, as I locked the door and turned off the porch light, I looked out into the snow one last time. The driveway was clean, the salt laid thick across the sidewalk. No tracks, no mess, just quiet. Not the kind that hides things, the kind that heals. "This house won't ever be what it was before," I whispered to no one in particular. "But maybe it can become something better." I didn't win a war. I didn't win a medal. I won something harder. Peace. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who smile across the dinner table. This story wasn't just about a forged document or a stolen home. It was about trust. And what happens when silence is no longer an act of peace, but of survival? What would you do if someone in your family quietly tried to erase you? Share your thoughts in the comments, And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true feeling stories that hit close to home.